What's going on, my friends? I hope everybody's doing amazing. The Anniversary Realms, the long-awaited classic fresh. Something we asked and even begged Blizzard for such a long time. Now, it has been full 5 months since Anniversary Fresh was released, and we are approaching Phase 4. However, many players are just now starting their journey for epic gear, while many are still leveling. Some players have leveled their alts, while others stuck with their main character, obtaining best in slot gear, obtaining best recipes for their profession, farming gold, etc. Now, me personally, I have 4 level 60s on the Night Slayer server. I have an almost full best in slot robe that I only need 2 items for, one from Blackwing Layer, one from the Molten Core. And I have a fresh level 60 mage that still wears mostly greens and some blues. Now, as competitive guilds and main raiders are rushing through the content, the alts and those who took it slow to level are finding themselves more and more in challenging pugs. Something that I have noticed while trying to gear up my very fresh level 60 mage. Pug groups feel to wipe more frequently, often resulting in unfinished raids, and having 5 players rolling on the same item that has a 20% chance to drop from a 1-week lockout raid doesn't help. Well, I mean, it makes sense. Why would a nearly best in slot geared player go to Onyxia when there is absolutely nothing that they need from there? I mean, what incentive would they have? No, what about if a player is 100% best in slot gear? Will they continue to run anything? Will they go to any raids or dungeons? Probably not. Which leaves raids to a less geared and perhaps even less skilled players to compete over gear. Now, on Era, there was GDKP. GDKP provided a fully geared players an incentive to continue running content from which said players did not need anything. Doing so lessened the competition for the gear for players that did need gear, since the geared players, they were not there for the gear, they were there for the gold, and they weren't going to bid against the less geared players. Now, I know, JDKP has been outlawed by Blizzard, mostly because it encourages and nourishes gold selling and buying. But is there another way or another system that can keep the positive effect of JDKP while avoiding the negatives, like the encouraging gold buying and selling, for example? So today we're going to explore what other options and alternatives there may be to the JDKP system. Now, before I go on, I wanted to ask you for a small favor. I have met all of my requirements to be a YouTube partner, all except for subscribers. Watched hours, amount of videos, all check. I just need subscribers. If you can, please like and subscribe. It's free to you, but means such a lot to me. And if you can't, I mean, that's all right too. Anyway, let's continue. So first, let's talk about JDKP itself. The pros of the JDKP is what I just described above. It incentivizes players to run content beyond the gear needs. I think this cannot be ignored or overlooked. Now, the cons, which there are many, is that it nourishes the gold selling and buying, which in turn creates the inflation, as more bots are farming gold because of the higher demand, well, meaning more bots in the game, and as more gold is being introduced to the economy, it creates more and more inflation. Now, another con of JDKP is that, at least from what I saw, all raids are suddenly JDKP. In my little time on Era, I saw little to no SR runs or any other bugs except JDKP. Now, I talked about this in another video about WoW economy. I'll link it in the description. In that video, I was suggesting JDKP as a gold sink, actually. So JDKP would be built into the game, just like a looking for group tool was built into the new anniversary servers. So if player chooses to use JDKP, they must only do so through the tool. The tool, in turn, will have a steep 25% tax on any transactions, which will remove large chunks of gold out of the economy, which will also give Blizzard some ideas and statistics to look at where gold is coming from and where it's going. What are your thoughts? Tell me in the comments. Now, another option similar to this, and in my opinion, it can even be more beneficial than JDKP, is to remove the gold part. Just completely remove the gold part from the equation and use some kind of a token points for DKP based POG content. So maybe even create an add-on that will award every player that hits level 60, let's say 1,000 DKP. Players can bid and receive DKP from the DKP raids, just same as with gold. Since DKP will be easily transferable, geared players who are making the DKP can then send DKP to their alts, to the players who will be spending it. What do you think? Again, please comment. No feedback is bad. Now, DKP or JDKP, if neither of them are an option, what about building an in-game mechanic that would allow a bind on pickup items to be awarded to another character, but only on the same account? So, for example, I'm a tank. I have BIS gear, I need nothing for Molten Core. However, my mage does. So I go to the Molten Core with my warrior, help the raid defeat the Ragnaros, but I am able to bid or roll on the mage gear. Now, of course, this would all have to be done and, have to be discussed and agreed upon before the raid, considering everybody's on board. Now, once the warrior wins the mage item, he can only trade it or pass it to another character on the same account. Now, I know I certainly would run things with my decked out rogue if I had a chance to gain gear for one of my fresh level 60s. Now, I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I think it can be so beneficial to the game and to player to continue to have fun, to keep the best geared character still engaged in all of the endgame content. Now, we can remove gear or gold completely out of the equation with the next option. Something I borrowed from Season of Discovery. So implement something equivalent to a wild offering that would only drop from the final raid bosses. Now in Season of Discovery, in Phase 3, there were several additional bosses added to several dungeons that dropped an item called wild offering. I mean, call it whatever. Call it final boss dropping if you want. It doesn't matter. The idea is the same. So players can turn in said offering, or whatever it's called, for some kind of a unique reward. It doesn't have to be power changing. I mean, it could be, but it could be also something like a mount or a fun trinket that turns you, I don't know, into a tree. A unique looking shirt, or, a unique outfit, maybe an enchant. Have a vendor in every city or in every major city where player can trade these offerings for unique items. Maybe a rep boost or certain faction. Item doesn't have to be cosmetic either. I mean, it could technically be epics or legendaries. I mean, whatever would work out best. Now, since raids are on the lockout, it would encourage players to run raids from which they may not necessarily need any gear just to obtain these wild offerings, or whatever they would be called. If the reward is enticing enough, however. Reward has to be enticing. Now, again, what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. Well, we are back to gold, as gold is probably the biggest incentive in WoW. So for the next idea, how about a system where players can decide to hire other players as mercenaries? So let's say we have 10 players, they need items from Onyxia. We can do conventional run and invite another 15 to 20 players who are not well geared and also need items from Onyxia, meaning they will be bidding on the same items as us. Or we can pitch in, 75 gold each, maybe 100 gold each, build a pool of gold, and in this case it would be either 750 gold or 1,000, which would allow geared players to join who will not be able to bid on any gear, but will split the gold pool upon raid's completion. Since they are stronger and well geared, they could be in the lesser number, so the less of them, the more gold they get. The benefits to the paying players is that raid does get done. It does get done in time, quickly, and they have a much better chance of bidding on their gear because the other half of the raid not going to need the gear. So finally, now my final thought and final idea, and perhaps it's the most simple one, is to introduce a powerful world buff that can only be obtained by completing all or a certain number of lockouts per 1 week. So maybe even make the buff last through player's death. Now imagine hitting PvP Battleground with a 10% bonus to all stats that lasts 3 hours, for example, and persists through the death. Now, I'm not a professional game developer or designer. This is something I alone thought of in the span of a couple days. I'm sure a group of creative people can come up with a much better alternatives. What do you guys think of what I said? Do you agree with what I was saying? Do you think it's decent ideas, or do you think the game best the way it is now? Tell me in the comments. And as always, thanks for listening.